In a normal year, one plastic doll generates more revenue than the entire annual economic output of several recognized nations. She has no factory of her own. She has never drawn a paycheck. She is 11.5 inches tall. She has been the same plastic woman since 1959, and she has personally carried a publicly traded American corporation on her shoulders for 3 generations. And then in the mid-2000s, a rival appeared with bigger eyes, bigger lips, and an attitude. And in roughly 3 years, it took half her kingdom. By 2008, she was minutes from extinction. So her owners did what empires do. When they are losing, they did not compete, they sued, and they dragged a federal court into a decade-long war over a question no one had ever thought to ask: who legally owns a doll's face? This is Market Cap Stories. Today, the most savage brand warfare bloodbath in the history of the toy aisle. Let's start the way an analyst would, not with the doll, with the balance sheet, because Barbie is not, in the financial sense, a toy. She is intellectual property, a self-renewing, infinitely reskinnable brand asset that happens to be sold. In the shape of a girl, here is what makes a doll into an asset. A physical product gets sold once and is gone. An intellectual property gets licensed forever. Mattel does not merely sell Barbie dolls. It rents Barbie's name to other companies for apparel, for shoes, for cosmetics, for video games, for bed sheets, for branded bicycles, and collects a royalty on every unit without manufacturing a single one of them. In intellectual property terms, this is the dream structure. The cost of creating the asset was paid. In 1959, everything since is amortization, and royalty the marginal cost of letting one more licensee print Barbie on one more lunchbox is effectively zero. The marginal revenue is a percentage of every lunchbox sold on Earth. And here is the lever that makes the whole thing compound: reinvention. At zero inventory risk, Barbie can be an astronaut in one quarter, a paleontologist in the next, a president, a surgeon, a different skin tone, a different body type, a different decade's fashion. And each new version is the same asset wearing new packaging. Mattel has issued over 200 distinct careers for one doll. Each one is a fresh reason to buy the same product again. So when we say Barbie outearns small nations, understand what is actually being measured. Not a toy, a licensing engine, a brand that prints money in 200 costumes and never ages a day. To understand the war, you have to understand the throne, and the throne was built by a woman named Ruth Handler. In the early 1950s, Ruth Handler watched her daughter, whose name was Barbara, play with paper dolls. But the girl ignored the baby dolls the entire industry was built on. She gave her paper dolls adult jobs, adult lives, adult futures. Handler had found an empty category, a doll a child could imagine becoming, not just caring for. On March 9th, 1959, at the New York Toy Fair, Mattel unveiled Barbie, named after Handler's daughter. Buyers were skeptical. Some refused to stock her. An adult-figured doll was, to the trade, a strange and risky product. She sold 350,000 units in the first year. Anyway, the skeptics had misjudged the entire market. What Handler had actually invented was not a doll. It was a platform, because the doll itself was almost beside the point. The real business was the wardrobe. Mattel sold Barbie cheap and then sold you her clothes, her house, her car, her friends, her boyfriend Ken, her sisters, her horse, forever. If that structure sounds familiar, it should. It is the razor and blades model. Sell the platform, monopolize the accessories. Applied to childhood, the doll is the razor. The endless wardrobe is the blade, and the child reorders. For a decade, for roughly 40 years, there was no real war. Competitors came, none mattered. Barbie's market share in the fashion doll category sat above 80%. In strategic terms, she was not a leader. She was a monopoly with a ponytail. A monopoly that comfortable develops a specific weakness. It stops listening. By the late 90s, the world had changed and Barbie had not. Her proportions drew criticism. Her aspirational fantasy, the perfect blonde in the dream house, felt to a new generation of girls less like a dream and more like their mother's dream. In 2001, a smaller, scrappier company called MGA Entertainment, run by an Iranian-American entrepreneur named Isaac Larian, launched a line of dolls called Bratz, and Bratz was everything. Barbie was not. Where Barbie was wholesome, Bratz was attitude. Where Barbie was a smooth, idealized adult, Bratz was a caricature. Huge head, huge eyes, glossy lips, urban fashion. A multi-ethnic crew with names like Yasmin, Chloe, Sasha, and Jade. They were marketed not as women a girl might become, but as the cool, older girls a girl already wanted to be. The girls with a passion for fashion. It was, in branding terms, a sharper knife. The market response was not gradual. It was a landslide. Within 3 years, Bratz had seized an estimated 40% of the fashion doll market by the mid-2000s. Global Bratz sales were reported in the billions of dollars. For the first time in 40 years, Barbie was losing. Let me put the danger in the only language that matters in Issaquah, or in this case, El Segundo, California, where Mattel is headquartered, the language of the franchise line item. When a single property is 25 to 30% of your entire company's revenue, you do not have a product problem. You have an existential problem. A 30% decline in Barbie does not dent the quarter. It threatens the whole corporation's earnings multiple, the very number that determines what Mattel's stock is worth. And the decline was real through the mid-2000s. Barbie posted quarter after quarter of falling sales. In some periods, double-digit percentage drops in gross sales. Year over year, analysts began to write the sentence, no Mattel executive could survive, that the franchise might be in structural decline. By 2008, the picture was stark. The most valuable toy property in the world was being outstyled, out-marketed, and outgrown by a company a fraction of Mattel's size, run by a man who had started selling electronics out of a small office in a fair fight over which doll little girls liked better. Mattel was losing, so Mattel decided to change the rules of the fight. Here is where the story stops being about toys and starts being about law, because Mattel's weapon was not a better doll. It was a question about a man named Carter Bryant. Carter Bryant was a doll designer, and the explosive fact at the center of everything that followed was this: Carter Bryant designed Bratz, the original concept, the name, the drawings, while he was employed at Mattel working on Barbie. Bryant left Mattel in 2000, took his concept to MGA, and Bratz launched. The following year, when Mattel discovered the connection, its lawyers saw something far more valuable than a competitor. They saw a claim of ownership, because most employment contracts at companies like Mattel contain a clause, an inventions assignment clause, stating that anything an employee creates during their employment belongs to the employer. Do you see the strategy? Mattel did not have to prove that Barbie was better. It did not have to win back a single girl in the toy aisle. If a court agreed that the Bratz concept was conceived on Mattel's time, then Bratz, the entire billion-dollar franchise, legally belonged to Mattel. They would not defeat their rival in the market. They would own it in a courtroom. In 2004, Mattel sued. What followed was not a lawsuit. It was a siege, one that would last the better part of a decade. The litigation that became known as Mattel versus MGA is one of the longest, most expensive, most reversed intellectual property battles in American corporate history. Combined legal costs across both companies have been estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. In 2008, a federal jury in Riverside, California, sided with Mattel. It found that Carter Bryant had indeed conceived Bratz, while at Mattel, and the judge issued a staggering order. MGA was to hand over the entire Bratz brand to Mattel, the dolls, the molds, the name, everything. Retailers were told to pull Bratz from the shelves. For a moment, Mattel had done it. It had not beaten Bratz. It had legally erased it. The bigger-eyed rival that nearly murdered Barbie was by court order the property of the very company it had nearly destroyed. Isaac Larian's empire was, on paper, gone, but appellate courts exist precisely for moments like this. In 2010, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, in an opinion written by Judge Alex Kozinski, vacated the order. The reasoning cut to the heart of intellectual property law. Yes, Mattel might own Bryant's original sketches and concept, but it did not. The court held automatically own the multi-billion-dollar global empire that MGA had built on top of that idea through years of its own investment, marketing, and execution. Kozinski's opinion contained a line that should be taught in every business school in the country. He warned against letting a copyright or contract claim over a small seed of an idea devour the entire orchard that someone else had spent years growing. In plain terms, you cannot use a clause about a sketch to seize a billion-dollar company. And then the war turned. On retrial in 2011, MGA did not merely defend. It counterattacked. It accused Mattel of stealing MGA's own trade secrets, of sending employees into private MGA showrooms at toy fairs under false pretenses to photograph unreleased products. The second jury did not just clear MGA, it turned the verdict completely around. It found that Mattel was the party that had misappropriated trade secrets, and it awarded MGA damages of roughly $85 million, later adjusted with attorney's fees and costs toward a figure reported near $170 million. Read that sequence again, as a strategist would. Mattel sued to seize Bratz. It won a total victory, then lost it on appeal, then lost the retrial, and ended up writing a 9-figure check to the very rival it had tried to legally execute. The litigation as strategy gambit did not just fail, it boomeranged. And yet, and this is the part the MBA crowd should sit with, the gambit was not irrational, because while the courts argued for a decade, something happened to Bratz in the real world. The years of injunctions, recalls, shelf removals, and uncertainty had shattered its retail momentum. Bratz lost its shelf space, lost its licensing partners, and lost the cultural moment. The brand never fully recovered its peak. In other words, Mattel lost the case and arguably won the war. The lawsuit was not, in the end, about owning Bratz. It was about freezing Bratz, tying its rival up in litigation long enough for Barbie to stabilize and reload. Litigation used not to win a judgment, but to deny a competitor the one thing it could never get back: time. By the late 2010s, the threat had passed, but a new problem remained. Barbie had survived, but survival is not relevance. The doll was still in the cultural conversation, a symbol of an older, narrower ideal. Mattel needed more than a truce. It needed a reinvention of the asset itself. So Mattel did something no toy company had truly pulled off before. It converted its core intellectual property into a cinematic universe. In 2023, the Barbie film, directed by Greta Gerwig, was released. It grossed over $1.4 billion worldwide, becoming one of the highest-grossing films of the year and the highest-grossing film in Warner Bros. history at the time. Now apply the financial lens. The film was not the prize. The film was the marketing campaign, one that audiences paid $1.4 billion for the privilege of watching. In the wake of the film, Barbie doll sales surged. The brand's cultural standing flipped from dated to ironic cool to genuinely beloved almost overnight. One movie reskinned a 64-year-old asset for an entire new generation. This is the licensing flywheel at its most powerful. The film drives doll sales. Doll sales drive licensing demand. Licensing demand funds the next film, and the asset that was minutes from extinction in 2008 is now a self-renewing cross-media entertainment franchise, the same 11.5-inch doll wearing her 200th and most lucrative costume yet. Movie star Barbie's story is not, in the end, a story about a toy. It is a story about what an asset is, a piece of intellectual property created once in 1959 that has been reskinned, marketed, litigated over, nearly killed, and resurrected. And that survives, not because the plastic is special, but because the ownership of the idea is defended with everything a corporation can bring: marketing, capital, and when those fail, the full weight of a federal court. In a market full of companies that defend their products, Mattel defends an idea and has done so for 65 years. Across boardrooms, toy aisles, and courtrooms alike, one costume at a time. If this is the kind of strategic anatomy you find useful, subscribe to Market Cap Stories. We will see you in the next case. So yes, in closing, no cadence promise.